Dane Carter stood at attention, feeling completely out of place in the Grand Palace Hall. The room was filled with towering alien nobles, their shimmering robes reflecting the golden lights above. The Zerethian Empire was one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy, and Dane, a simple Terran soldier, had no business being here. Yet, here he was. As a member of the diplomatic security force, his job was simple: stand guard, ensure the safety of the human ambassadors, and avoid unnecessary attention. But things had taken a strange turn when Princess Kalara, the heir to the Empire, had fixed her glowing violet eyes on him. And then, in front of thousands of witnesses, she had done the unthinkable. "I choose him," she declared, her voice strong and unwavering. "Dane Carter of Earth, he will be my consort." Silence fell over the hall. Every noble, every warrior, even the Emperor himself, turned to stare at the human soldier. Dane felt his stomach drop. What? He had heard of this Zerethian tradition. Their princesses had the right to choose their own consort, a mate who would stand beside them in ruling the empire. It was a sacred decision, one that could not be easily overturned. And now, somehow, she had chosen him. Dane shook his head. "There must be some mistake, Princess." "There is no mistake," Kalara interrupted. She stepped forward, her golden hair catching the light. There was no hesitation in her expression. "I have made my choice." Murmurs spread through the hall. Some nobles looked shocked. Others looked furious. The Emperor himself narrowed his reptilian eyes. A Zerethian noble stepped forward, his ridged face filled with outrage. "This is unacceptable. A human cannot be consort to the princess." Dane agreed. He had no desire to be dragged into alien politics. He had fought in wars, survived impossible missions. But this was far worse. "With all due respect, Princess," he said carefully, "I think you've chosen the wrong guy." Kalara's eyes locked onto his. "No, I have chosen exactly who I want." The Emperor finally spoke. His deep voice echoed through the chamber. "You understand the consequences of this decision, daughter." "I do," Kalara replied firmly. Dane clenched his fists. He could feel the tension in the room rising. This wasn't just some foolish whim of a spoiled princess. This was political. The nobles were scheming. He could almost hear the plans forming in their minds. And then he realized something chilling. If they couldn't convince the princess to change her mind, they would make sure he disappeared. Dane exhaled sharply. He had gone from being the simple soldier to the most wanted man in the empire, all because of one stubborn princess. And by the way she was looking at him, he had a feeling she wasn't going to let him go. Dane Carter sat in the massive guest chamber, staring at the richly decorated walls. Gold and silver designs covered every surface, and a large window showed the shining city of Zereth Prime outside. It was beautiful, but to him, it felt like a cage. He had no choice but to stay. After Princess Kalara's shocking declaration, the Emperor had ordered him to be kept under protection. Dane knew what that really meant. He was being watched. If he tried to escape, he wouldn't get far. The Zerethian Empire didn't take political matters lightly, and now he was one of those matters. A soft knock came at the door. Before he could answer, the door slid open, and Princess Kalara stepped inside. Dane stood up immediately. "Princess, we need to talk." Kalara smiled, walking toward him. "I was hoping you'd say that." Dane crossed his arms. "Why did you choose me?" Kalara tilted her head, studying him. "Because you're different." "That's not an answer." She sighed and walked to the window, gazing at the city. "The empire is falling apart, Dane. The nobles fight among themselves, and enemies surround us. My father is strong, but even he cannot stop what's coming. The Eldrathi are preparing for war." Dane had heard of the Eldrathi, a brutal, warlike species that had been pushing against the Empire's borders for years. "What does that have to do with me?" he asked. Kalara turned to face him. "The nobles expect me to marry one of their sons to secure political alliances. But they are weak. Cowards. I need someone strong. Someone who isn't afraid to fight. Someone like you. Dane exhaled. Princess, I'm a soldier, not a prince. I don't belong here. She stepped closer, her violet eyes intense. You belong where you are needed. Dane ran a hand through his short brown hair, frustration building. And what if I refuse? Kaelara's expression darkened. Then you won't live long enough to leave. Dane felt his muscles tense. Is that a threat? Not from me, she said seriously. The nobles won't accept you. They will do everything in their power to remove you. Assassins, poison, a tragic accident. They have many ways. Dane already knew she was right. He had seen the way the nobles looked at him. He was an outsider, a problem they needed to solve. So, what do you suggest? He asked, voice calm but firm. Kaelara smiled slightly. You stay by my side. Learn how the Empire works. And when the time comes, you fight. Not just for yourself, but for me. Dane sighed. He hated politics. He hated being trapped. But if the alternative was getting killed in the dark by some noble's assassin, fine, he said at last. But if I'm staying, I make my own rules. Kaelara's smile widened. I wouldn't expect anything less. Dane Carter lay on the massive bed in his guest chamber, staring at the ceiling. His mind refused to rest. The palace was too quiet, too perfect. It felt unnatural. He had spent years in the military, fighting on hostile planets where the enemy could strike at any moment. That experience had taught him one thing. When things seemed peaceful, danger was near. His instincts screamed at him. Something was wrong. Then he heard it. A faint sound, like fabric brushing against the air. Dane moved fast. He rolled off the bed just as a blade stabbed into the pillow where his head had been. He landed on the floor, eyes locking onto the shadowy figure standing over his bed. The assassin was clad in black, their glowing red eyes marking them as Zarethian. No hesitation, no time to think. Dane lunged forward, grabbing the assassin's wrist before they could strike again. He twisted hard, forcing the blade from their grip. The assassin responded with a sharp kick, sending Dane stumbling back. Another figure dropped from the ceiling. Two of them. Dane barely had time to react before the second assassin slashed at him. He dodged, but the blade nicked his arm, a burning pain spreading through the cut. Poison. No time to worry about that. He grabbed the first assassin by the arm and slammed them into the wall. The impact was hard enough to crack the decorative metal. The second assassin lunged again, but Dane ducked, then countered with a brutal punch to the stomach. The assassin staggered. Dane followed up with a knee to the face. One down. The first assassin recovered quickly, drawing a hidden dagger. But before they could move, the door to the chamber slammed open. Princess Kaelara stood there, flanked by her royal guards. Her violet eyes burned with fury. The assassin hesitated. That was a mistake. Dane grabbed them by the collar and drove his fist into their face. The assassin collapsed. Kaelara stepped inside, looking at the unconscious bodies. I see you're still alive. Dane wiped blood from his knuckles. Barely. She sighed, kneeling beside one of the assassins. This was expected. The nobles don't want you here, Dane. This is their way of sending a message. Dane clenched his jaw. He had faced death many times before, but this was different. This wasn't war. This was politics. And he hated politics. So, what now? He asked. Kaelara stood, her expression cold. Now, they learn that you're not so easy to kill. Dane smirked. I like the sound of that. He wasn't going to just survive. He was going to fight back. Dane Carter stood before the Zarethian War Council, his back straight, his expression calm. But inside, he was ready for a fight. The massive chamber was filled with Zarethian nobles, military commanders, and advisors. They sat in a semicircle on raised platforms, their cold reptilian eyes fixed on him. Some looked disgusted, others looked amused, like they were watching an animal in a cage. At the center sat Emperor Velos, his golden robes gleaming under the lights. His gaze was unreadable. Beside him stood Princess Kaelora, her expression defiant. A noble with dark ridges on his forehead sneered, "A human standing in our council. This is an insult to the Empire." Another noble scoffed. "First, he steals the princess. Now, he thinks he has a place in our halls." Dane exhaled slowly. "Here we go." Kaelora stepped forward. "Dane Carter is under my protection. If anyone has a problem, speak to me directly." The nobles murmured angrily, but one of them, a general with heavy battle scars, leaned forward. His voice was deep and commanding. "Then let's speak of real matters. The Eldrathi have sent an ultimatum." At this, the room fell silent. The general continued. "The Eldrathi demand that Princess Kaelora be given to them in marriage. If we refuse, they will wage war." Dane clenched his fists. So that was their plan. The Eldrathi weren't just a warrior race. They were conquerors. They didn't offer peace. They only offered submission. If the Empire handed Kaelora over, it wouldn't stop at her. They would take everything. A noble with golden tattoos smirked. "Perhaps we should consider the offer. A war with the Eldrathi would be costly." Kaelora's voice was sharp. "Surrender is not an option." The tattooed noble shrugged. "Then what is the option, Princess? Shall we place our hopes in this human?" He gestured at Dane like he was trash. "What can he do that the Empire cannot?" Dane finally spoke, his voice steady. "Win." A few nobles laughed. Others looked outraged. Dane stepped forward. "You've fought the Eldrathi for years, but you don't understand them. They only respect strength. The moment you consider surrender, you've already lost." The scared general studied him. "And what would you suggest, human?" Dane smirked. "You're fighting them the wrong way. You keep meeting them in open war. That's their strength. You need to take the fight to them, hit their supply lines, weaken their leaders, break their morale." Murmurs spread through the chamber. Some nobles looked uncertain, but the general nodded slowly. "That is a warrior's strategy." Kaelora turned to her father. "We need a new approach, and Dane Carter is the key." The Emperor was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. "Very well. If this human believes he can fight, then let him prove it." Dane grinned. Challenge accepted. Dane Carter stood on the Imperial war deck, staring at the massive holographic display of the galaxy. Red markers indicated Eldrathi fleet movements, spreading like a disease toward the Zarethian Empire's borders. He crossed his arms. The Eldrathi weren't just preparing for war. They were ready to strike. Princess Kaelora stood beside him, her expression hard. Across from them were the highest-ranking Zarethian generals and nobles. Some still looked at Dane like an outsider. Others, after hearing his strategy, were beginning to see him differently. General Varrock, the battle-scarred warrior who had listened to Dane in the War Council, spoke first. "We intercepted a message from the Eldrathi High Warlord." His voice was grim. "They have given us 7 days to surrender the princess, or they will attack." A noble scoffed. "This is madness. We cannot fight them directly." Another noble sneered. "Perhaps we should give them what they want. If Princess Kaelora goes willingly, we can avoid war." Dane's fists clenched. "That's not avoiding war. That's delaying it. If you give them the princess, they'll see you as weak, and weakness invites attack." Varrock nodded. "The human is right. The Eldrathi have never honored a peace treaty. They take and take, until nothing is left." Kaelora's voice was firm. "I will never surrender." Dane smirked. "Good. Then we fight." The nobles looked at him skeptically. "With what army, human? The Eldrathi outnumber us." Dane stepped forward, pointing at the holographic map. "You've been fighting them the wrong way. They're strong in open battle, But no army is invincible. We don't attack their fleets. We cripple them from the inside. Varrock raised an eyebrow. Explain. Dane pointed at key locations on the map. The Eldrathi war machine needs fuel, weapons, and command centers. If we hit their supply chains, their fleets will starve. If we take out their warlords, their leadership will fracture. Kalara nodded. A precision strike. A battle before the war. The Emperor, who had been silent, finally spoke. And who would lead such a mission? Dane's smirk widened. There was only one answer. I will. The room erupted into protests. A human, leading an attack against the Eldrathi. Varrock silenced them with a raised hand. He looked at Dane with approval. It's a warrior's plan, and a warrior's risk. Kalara turned to the Emperor. If we do nothing, the Eldrathi will come to our doorstep. This is our chance to strike first. The Emperor studied Dane, then nodded slowly. You will have a team. Prove that you are worth the princess's choice. Dane grinned. Time to show the Empire what a human could do. Dane Carter adjusted the straps of his armored vest as the stealth dropship sped through the cold darkness of space. Inside the small, dimly lit cabin, his strike team prepared for the mission ahead. 5 Zarethian warriors sat with him, their expressions unreadable. They were all handpicked by General Varrock, elite soldiers who had fought in countless battles, and none of them trusted Dane. Princess Kalara stood near the cockpit, speaking with the pilot. She turned and walked toward Dane, her violet eyes filled with determination. We will reach the Eldrathi supply station in 10 minutes, she said. After that, you take the lead. Dane gave a small smirk. Glad to know you have faith in me. One of the Zarethian soldiers, a tall warrior named Roker, scoffed. We follow orders. It doesn't mean we trust you, human. Dane chuckled. That's fine. You don't have to trust me. You just have to keep up. Roker bared his sharp teeth, but Kalara raised a hand. Enough. We focus on the mission. The target was an Eldrathi supply station, a floating fortress deep inside enemy space. It was lightly guarded but critical to the Eldrathi war effort. Destroying it would cut off weapons and fuel to their advancing fleets. As the dropship approached, the pilot's voice crackled in their earpieces. Stealth field engage. No enemy detection so far. Dane moved to the hatch, gripping his rifle. We go in fast and silent. Take out the command center first. If we do this right, they won't know what hit them. The ship shuddered as it latched onto the station's maintenance airlock. The hatch opened with a hiss, revealing a dimly lit corridor. Dane led the way, moving swiftly and silently. The team advanced through the metallic hallways, weapons ready. The station was quiet, too quiet. Roker muttered, "Something isn't right." Dane's instincts screamed a warning. Then, an explosion rocked the station. Alarms blared. Red emergency lights flickered. The corridor ahead burst open as Eldrathi soldiers poured in, weapons raised. An ambush. Dane barely had time to react before the first shots were fired. He dove behind cover, firing back. The mission had just turned into a fight for survival. Kalara shouted, "We need to reach the command center. Now." Dane gritted his teeth. So much for a quiet mission. He glanced at his team. Change of plans. We fight our way through. Roker snarled, blasting an Eldrathi soldier. Finally, something I agree with. Blaster fire filled the air. Dane pushed forward, knowing one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. Blaster fire lit up the corridor as Dane Carter and his team fought their way through the Eldrathi supply station. The ambush had turned their quiet infiltration into an all-out battle. Dane ducked behind a crate as a plasma bolt sizzled past his head. "So much for stealth," he shouted. Roker, the Zarethian warrior, laughed as he shot down an enemy soldier. "Stealth is for cowards. This is a real fight." Princess Kalara fired her energy pistol with deadly precision, taking down 2 Eldrathi guards. "We don't have time for this. We need to get to the command center. Dane peeked over cover and spotted a reinforced blast door at the end of the hallway. That's our way in. We move now. The team pushed forward, laying down suppressing fire. The Eldrathi warriors were strong, their bulky forms covered in thick armor, but they weren't expecting this level of resistance. One by one, they fell. Dane reached the blast door and pressed a control panel. Locked. Kelara, cover me, he ordered, pulling a small explosive charge from his belt. The princess and the others laid down heavy fire as Dane placed the charge against the door. He pressed the detonator and jumped back. Boom! The door blasted open, sending fire and smoke into the room beyond. Without hesitation, Dane and his team rushed inside. The command center was a large circular room filled with control panels, holodisplays, and stunned Eldrathi officers. One officer, taller than the rest, snarled and reached for his weapon. Dane was faster. He shot him in the chest, sending him crashing into a console. The rest of the officers raised their hands in surrender. Secure the room, Kelara commanded. The Zarethian soldiers moved quickly, taking control of the consoles and shutting down the station's defenses. Roker looked at a blinking red display and growled, "Reinforcements are on the way." Dane didn't hesitate. He pointed at the main console. "Then we blow this place before they arrive." Kelara nodded and started typing on the controls. "I'm overloading the reactor. We have 5 minutes to escape." The alarms changed to a high-pitched warning siren. Over the station's speakers, an automated voice droned. "Core meltdown imminent. All personnel evacuate immediately." Dane turned to his team. "You heard the lady. Move." They ran back into the hallways, fighting through panicked Eldrathi trying to escape. The explosion shook the station as fires spread through the corridors. The dropship waited at the airlock, its engines roaring. Dane pushed Kelara inside as Rokar covered their retreat. The last Zarethian soldier jumped in, and the hatch slammed shut. "Go, go, go," Dane shouted. The pilot launched the ship into space just as the supply station exploded behind them, a massive fireball consuming everything. Kelara exhaled. Mission complete. Dane smirked. "Yeah. But now the Eldrathi know we're coming." The Zarethian Imperial War Council was in chaos. Holodisplays showed the burning wreckage of the Eldrathi supply station. The mission had been a success, but the enemy's response was swift and brutal. Dane Carter stood at the center of the chamber, arms crossed, watching the panicked nobles argue. "They will retaliate with full force," one shouted. "They already have," General Varrock said grimly, pointing to the holomap. Red markers blinked, showing Eldrathi fleet movements. "Our spies report that the Eldrathi have declared total war. They are mobilizing their main war fleet." Princess Kelara stepped forward. "We knew this was coming. The Eldrathi never retreat after a challenge. This was the only way to force them into open battle." A noble scoffed. "And what do you suggest? That we throw our forces against them and pray?" Dane smirked. "No, we lead them into a trap." The chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to him. Dane pointed at the holomap. "The Eldrathi believe we're weak. That's why they're rushing in without thinking. We use that against them." He tapped a location near the Nebari Nebula, a vast, clouded region of space, filled with ion storms and asteroid fields. "If we lure their fleet here, their ships will be blind. Their communications will be disrupted. They'll be sitting ducks." General Varrock grinned. "A perfect ambush." Kelara nodded. "We station our forces just outside the nebula. Once they're deep inside, we strike from all sides." The Emperor, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. "And who will lead this attack?" Dane didn't hesitate. "I will." The nobles erupted in protest. "A human cannot lead our forces. He's reckless. He's the only reason we have a fighting chance," Kelara said coldly. The Emperor studied Dane carefully. Then he nodded. Very well. You will command this battle, Dane Carter. Do not fail us. Dane smirked. Failure wasn't an option. A day later, Dane stood on the bridge of the Zarethian flagship, staring at the swirling clouds of the Nebari Nebula. The fleet was in position, waiting. Rokar, standing beside him, grunted. Are you sure they'll take the bait? As if in response, an alarm blared. The radar officer turned. Oldrathi fleet detected. They are entering the nebula. Dane's smirk widened. Right on schedule. On the main screen, massive Oldrathi warships pushed into the nebula, their engines glowing through the thick storm clouds. Kaelura's voice came through the comms. All ships in position, awaiting your order. Dane took a deep breath. This was it. He raised a fist. All forces, attack. The Zarethian fleet surged forward, unleashing hellfire upon the trapped Oldrathi ships. The battle had begun. Dane Carter gripped the command console as the Zarethian fleet charged into the stormy depths of the Nebari Nebula. Outside the flagship's reinforced windows, the space battle had already begun. The Oldrathi warships, massive and heavily armed, struggled inside the thick clouds of ion energy. Their sensors flickered, their targeting systems scrambled by the nebula's interference. Dane smirked, just as planned. All ships, open fire, he commanded. The Zarethian fleet unleashed hell. Bright energy cannons and torpedoes slammed into the confused Oldrathi forces, tearing through their ranks before they could even react. On the holo display, Oldrathi ships blinked out one by one. Rokar, standing beside Dane, grinned as he fired from his station. They're struggling. Their formation is breaking. Kaelura's voice crackled through the comms. Pushing forward with the second wave. Their command ship is exposed. Dane's eyes locked onto the Oldrathi High Warlord's dreadnought, a towering battleship at the center of the enemy fleet. If they took it down, the Oldrathi forces would collapse. He pointed at the screen. Focus fire on that dreadnought. Bring it down. Zarethian destroyers moved in, launching heavy torpedoes. Boom! Explosions rocked the warlord's ship, but it wasn't enough. The dreadnought's shields held strong. The enemy started to recover. Their warships, though blinded, began firing wildly into the storm. Plasma bolts struck two Zarethian cruisers, sending them spiraling into flames. A warning alarm blared. Enemy flagship is charging its main cannon, a crew member shouted. Dane's eyes widened. The Oldrathi weren't retreating. They were focusing all power into one final shot. If that blast hit the Zarethian fleet, it would destroy them all. He had seconds to act. Kaelura, get your squad ready, he said quickly. She didn't question him. Understood. Dane turned to Rokar. We're boarding that ship. Rokar grinned. Now this is my kind of plan. Minutes later, Dane, Kaelura, and a strike team launched from their stealth dropship, heading straight for the Oldrathi dreadnought. Dodging fire, they breached the hull and stormed inside. The corridors were filled with Oldrathi soldiers, but Dane didn't stop. He blasted through them, moving fast. The control room was just ahead. They reached the bridge, where the High Warlord stood waiting. A towering beast, armored in black and gold. His eyes burned with rage. You dare set foot on my ship, human, he growled. Dane smirked. Yeah, and I'm here to turn off the lights. The warlord lunged. Dane dodged, rolling aside as Kaelura fired her plasma pistol. The battle was on. If they failed, the Zarethian fleet would be wiped out. Dane clenched his fists. Failure wasn't an option. The High Warlord roared as he swung his massive energy blade, aiming to cut Dane Carter in half. Dane ducked, feeling the heat of the blade slice through the air, just inches from his head. He rolled to the side, grabbing his blaster and firing at the warlord's chest. The shots bounced off his thick armor. Kaelura and Rokar fired as well, but the Oldrathi leader charged through the attacks like a beast, slamming his fist into Rokar and sending him crashing into a control panel. Dane cursed. They couldn't overpower him with brute force. The warlord raised his blade for another strike. Dane needed a plan. Fast. His eyes darted to the command console behind the warlord. That was it. Dane grinned. Hey, ugly. Catch. He grabbed a plasma grenade from his belt and threw it. The warlord instinctively swung his blade, cutting the grenade midair, but that was a mistake. The grenade exploded in his face, sending him staggering backward. Dane didn't waste time. He sprinted toward the command console and slammed a control lever down. A mechanical voice echoed. Overload sequence activated. Main cannon shutting down. The warlord's eyes widened in rage. No. Kalara fired one final perfect shot, hitting the exposed joint in the warlord's armor. The blast pierced through his chest, and the mighty Oldrathi leader collapsed, his blade clattering to the ground. Dane exhaled. It was over. Roker groaned, standing up. That was insane. Kalara nodded. But we did it. The ship shook violently as explosions erupted in the halls. The warlord's death had sent the Oldrathi forces into chaos. Dane grabbed his comm. Fleet, this is Carter. The enemy flagship is disabled. Finish the job. From outside, the Zarethian fleet launched its final attack. The Oldrathi warships, leaderless and broken, fell one by one. The battle was over. Dane and his team rushed to the escape pods, launching just as the enemy dreadnought exploded behind them, its fiery remains vanishing into the nebula. Hours later, back at the Zarethian capital, the War Council celebrated. The Oldrathi had been defeated. Their invasion had collapsed. Dane stood on the balcony, looking at the alien city's glowing skyline. Kalara approached him, her violet eyes soft. You saved my people, she said. You saved me. Dane smirked. Not bad for a human, huh? She stepped closer. More than that. You've earned your place here. Dane chuckled. So, what now? Kalara smiled. Now, you stay by my side, whether you like it or not. Dane laughed. The Empire's young princess had chosen him, and she wasn't letting go.